Salvation comes from my one self. Salvation comes from my one self. Salvation comes from my one self. Okay, everybody join me. Salvation comes from my one self. Salvation comes from my one self. Salvation comes from my one self. Beautiful. This is all we need to hear. Salvation comes from my one self. Salvation comes from my one self. Salvation comes from my one self. Let's do it one more time and feel the truth of this one statement. Salvation comes from my one self. Salvation comes from my one self. Salvation comes from my one self. Let's take a nice deep breath. Salvation comes from my one self. It comes from me. That's another lesson we heard. Salvation comes from me. It doesn't come from outside of me. I'm not saved by someone who is separate from me, because anyone who is separate from me is in competition with me. Anyone who is one with me is unified. There is no competition. The Holy Spirit is not competing with you. Your brother isn't competing with you. Certainly the voice that brought this through isn't competing with you. It's telling you the truth. Now, whether you want to hear the truth, whether you want to follow the truth or not is your choice. However, this is a required course. Only the time that you take it is voluntary. So you're going to have to do it sooner or later. So why not now? Why not trust that He knows something that you're still waking up to? That salvation comes from your one self. If we can just relax and be humble. We've talked before about humility. The problem comes when, even with the course, when we get just a little bit of it, we say, okay, I got it. I'm ready to go. I remember when I was young, I used to be a magician. So I'd be in high school and whatever, and I would love doing tricks. So I would learn a trick, but I wouldn't master it before I would try and start showing it to people. I would like do it once or twice, say, I got it. And then I would try and do it for people, and I would mess it up, and they would see how it worked. And this is a different kind of magic trick. This is a magic trick that breaks down illusions. But if we don't be still and be humble and just stay in that receptive place rather than read one lesson and say, okay, I got it. Because then we're no longer humble. Then we're not allowing the Holy Spirit to speak to us. If we're receptive, then the Holy Spirit is always guiding us gently, gently, gently along the path. But what happens if you say, I got it, I know where I'm going now, but then you come to a fork in the road and you no longer have your guide with you. That's why the Course says you never have your own best interest in mind. You don't know how. So we have to stay humble. So let's see if he's as funny as he was in yesterday's lesson. This lesson, salvation comes from my one self, says, although you are one self, you experience yourself as two, as both good and evil, loving and hating, mind and body. This sense of being split into opposites induces feelings of acute and constant conflict. Does that feel familiar? And leads to frantic attempts to reconcile the contradictory aspects of the self-perception. Frantic attempts to reconcile the contradictory aspects of this self-perception. You have sought many such solutions, and none of them have worked. You've searched for it in relationships. You've searched for it in abundance. You've searched for it in self-serving spiritual paths. That's where it gets even more subtle. But the more subtle it is, I think the more delighted your ego is in slipping in covertly. These self-deceptive paths that we use to keep us from the simple truth that you're already home. You're already perfect. You don't need to do anything. The opposites you see in you will never be compatible, but one exists. One exists. The fact that truth and illusions cannot be reconciled no matter how you try, what means you use, or where you see the problem, must be accepted if you would be saved. Once again, the fact that truth and illusions cannot be reconciled must be accepted if you would be saved. Wow. I don't know about you, but I'm really feeling that one. We said before that we're constantly trying to bring the two together. The ego wants to bring life and death together as if such a thing were possible. And we're constantly trying to reconcile these two opposing forces rather than saying only one can be real. Either life is real or death is real. Either we really are just here alone, just born to suffer and maybe have a moment or two of joy and then die. Either that's true or something else that we feel inside of ourselves. And every single one of us has felt it. You wouldn't be here. Every human has felt it. That longing that can't be satisfied by anything in the world. No matter how much money we have. I mean, the most miserable people are the ones with the most money. Have you noticed that? Mm-hmm. Because they're constantly trying to protect their money as if their money is their salvation. But no, salvation comes from my one self, the experience of my oneness. So let's sing that one more time and just feel that salvation is already here. I need do nothing but accept this one lesson. Here we go. Salvation comes from my one self. Salvation comes from my one self. Salvation comes from my one self. Once more. Salvation comes from my one self. Salvation comes from my one self.